Hey, how's it going? Welcome back to another episode of The Process, where we go over the steps of how we painted this image right over here. It's always great to paint nature, and nature is one of the best instructors. So let's go ahead and take a look. All right, as we start off, we are on our tone canvas. Now, I'm just laying in the background over here, trying to get the major components more or less in place. You know, the grass is a nice tone. And one thing about grass that's really challenging for me, at least, is getting the nice sense of layering. There's so many layers when it comes to the depth of how the grass and these plants sort of read and layer and overlap each other. And there's so much compression on the ground that it becomes such a challenge. So, you know, one of the things that I like to try to do here is just try to get that sense of feeling. Trying to get the sense of a little bit of a more layered feel where the grass is all at different lengths. It feels, a bit overgrown and that sort of thing. All right. Now we have a little bit more time to play with the background. So with my reference, I was looking at the background and trying to just get a sense of this very, very loose background of leaves and trees and bushes and stuff. And one of the things that's so hard about this phase of the painting, for me at least, is trying to stay super loose. You know, anytime I'm outside looking at the subject matter or looking at photo reference, you know, there's so much detail, and that detail tends to overload my eyes, and I tend to gravitate towards just trying to copy what that detail is. And so one of the things that's so crucial about doing this personal painting series for me is learning how to edit. You know, and I want to learn how to edit down in a way where I can see information but not get bogged down by all the detail, and I'm able to see it in a simplified way so that I can approach the painting and duplicate what I'm seeing in an effective way. All right, now to the trees. You know, these are some graphic shapes. There's so much gesture to these tree trunks and to the overall branch design that I want to make sure that I'm really pushing that gesture. You know, big gestures of big, medium, and small, opposing rhythms and that sort of thing, I think is what's so important at this phase. Now, obviously, looking at the photo reference is going to be very, very important, or any other reference that you look at. And so I'm trying to make sure that I'm looking at the proportions. It's sort of like a human figure. It's the proportions that make each person a little bit different. So I don't want to make all these trees feel the same. It would feel a little bit odd, a little bit too manicured, and that's definitely not the feel of this location. So as you can see, each tree has its own very unique design, and that's where nature is such an awesome teacher. I was mentioning earlier that, you know, these are some of the things that I would love to pick up while I'm painting is understanding the difference of shapes. Even though these are the same items and they kind of look more or less the same, there's such a variety in the way the language is shaping all of this dynamically. So I thought that was really cool to mention. Keep laying in the trees and just focusing on a good system of layering. And I guess what I'm really trying to look for at this point is, am I repeating too many repeatable rhythms? Am I noticing any repeatable rhythms? And rhythms are something that are so important. I talk about this in a lot of my other classes, where rhythms for design, rhythms for color harmony, rhythms for composition, they're all different uses of rhythms, but they become so effective. And once I see a rhythm that's a little bit too repeated or noticeable, like a pattern, then it doesn't look organic to me anymore. I just have a hard time believing it. All right, let's get this first tree laid in. Okay, we have a little bit of the foliage at the top, the canopy, and I guess at this point right now I'm just trying to figure out how to paint this tree. What's the right color combo? What's the right application of brush strokes to kind of make it read? And now that I put that foreground tree in front of it, that background tree starts to feel right. You know, it feels loose. It has enough information in there, but it's loose enough where it feels like it's in the scene. And I think one of the words that I'll probably say a lot today is it feels right. I think that's something when it comes to painting sensibilities, is developing that sense of taste and decision making, where, you know, if it feels right and optically it kind of looks correct, then maybe, you know, it is in the right direction, and we can kind of pursue and kind of just continue, you know. At least that's the intention, right? We practice all of these things not to stay the same or to get worse, but to improve and to make it more, I guess, economical at times. Alrighty, now this tree in the front, what's a little bit different between the tree in the background and the tree right in front of it is that there's a lot more contrast in the tree in front. You know, so the darks get a little bit darker, the lights can get maybe a little bit lighter, but there's definitely opposing rhythms. And what's important is if you look at the tree branch that's really dark under the bottom, and behind it is like a very bright background tree trunk, that shows a lot of spatial distance, at least for me. I like the way that looks. You know, it kind of creates a nice sense of depth. All right, now moving on to the left side. You know, the lighting in the reference is so different. Each tree is being lit with a little bit of a different intensity. There's more or less light coming in from different patches, you know, different areas of this location. So each tree is going to be treated and painted with its own unique sensibilities. That's something that I noticed with this reference, is that none of these trees are just copy and paste. That's what makes it feel so fake. That's what makes it feel so, you know, kind of composited, where each one of these trees are different. Why? Because they're trying to fight for light, right? Like, I remember watching this Nature Channel show, and it was showing how these plants in the Amazon, they have to fight for the light because there's not a lot of light that kind of penetrates through all these like big rainforest tree canopies. And I thought that was so interesting because, like, I just thought plants were very passive, you know, but they're aggressively fighting and growing towards the light, even growing on top of other plants to sort of dominate them, you know. I thought that was just really interesting. Anyway, layering. One thing that I want to point out is that as I'm working from the background tree to, like, you know, more of the ones in the foreground, I want to make sure that I'm doing canopy, you know, the foliage behind the tree trunk and in front of it, because it grows sort of, you know, volumetrically, right? Almost like a cylinder, you know, a sphere around like the tree trunk. So I thought, you know, making sure that I get the layering, you see the leaves and foliage behind the tree trunk or the tree branches and in front of it, makes it feel more realistic. So I just wanted to make sure I get that sense of layering here. Doing a little hand painting with those little branches, those accent branches that kind of come in. I feel like those are like a sense of calligraphy. You know, you need a nice sense of like push and pull and you know, sort of like this mark making that just looks really, really beautiful. I think there's some classic painters that are just so good at that, you know. And in a lot of my other tutorials, I'm talking about production art, I'm talking about speed, efficiency. In this tutorial and in this breakdown, it's about taking your time. It's not about going as fast as you can and not taking these shortcuts. It's actually about enjoying the craft, being in love with the sort of the labor of love. You know, these are some terms that, like, I feel are not being spoken about too much, especially in concept design, because it is a commercially driven industry, and there is such an emphasis and focus on speed, efficiency, and, you know, obviously I'm one of those people that talk about that too. However, there's a whole other part to art that I think is so valuable, and it's feeding the soul. It's feeding your art soul, which is partially why this tree tutorial just was really, really engaging for me. You know, I wasn't trying to speed it up. I wasn't painting it for anybody else except for myself. And it became a different sort of enjoyment. Especially with commercial work being so aggressive, so time demanding, and at times can be overwhelming. It's great to get back to the purity of just, at least for myself, you know, just doing the art side of things, which is why I fell in love with it in the beginning. Now, let's see, we've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tree trunks before we get to the main one, the main focal point tree. So I feel like I have a little bit of mileage of practice, right? Like, it kind of makes sense. Like, work on the other ones in the back, keep it kind of loose, and as we progress forward, you get a little more practice, and they become tighter, right? So I thought that sort of approach was a good one to use, you know? All right, let's make sure that we're also exercising these ideas of contrast. You know, squinting my eyes down and making sure that we're looking at not just the marks and the details, but can we read the painting? Such an important part, you know? If you don't squint your eyes when you paint, give it a try. It'll really change the way you see things literally. And for me, it makes me able to observe the overall movements of the painting and not look at like these little details. So one thing about trees is that, you know, I see a lot of graphic shapes on them, but they are volumetric. So if you notice, I do these kind of shadow accents that run, you know, along the long axis of the branches. And then you kind of see me go horizontally, kind of like making contour lines across the surface. I feel like that brushstroke buildup is what makes painting so beautiful. You know, not all the brushstrokes are going in the same direction, and that direction of the brushstroke really helps inform the plane, the surface plane. You know, it's like when you look at, I don't know, I'll just say like John Singer Sargent, or, you know, like even a Dean Cornwell, two totally different types of painters, illustrators, but they use brushstrokes in such effective ways to show the form, the surface of the form, where that surface is going. And because trees are so complex, right, like we got to use like the most effective methods. So what is it? BTB, back to the basics, you know, back to basics. All right, now that I kind of laid everything in here, it's about editing, making some twists and making some adjustments. Not every painting goes so smooth where every brushstroke that you put down is meant to be. A lot of the time, they're just markers. They're just these measuring points that allow you to progress forward, and then sometimes those markers become adjusted later on because of how much you're able to progress the painting. So I thought that's kind of important to point out here, is it's a back and forth process. Back and forth process. Now I'm squinting my eyes down, trying to look at the tree trunks and thinking some of the background darker values seem a little dark. I think we need maybe a little bit of these higher key saturated greens that, you know, kind of pop some of those tree trunks forward. I thought that was a nice look. All right. Now the background is so loose, and I'm kind of glad that we approached it in such a loose way, that if we went tight or try to, you know, put in even a little bit of the sense of details, all the trees in front of it now would have to be even more elevated in terms of their sense of, you know, detail and information. And for me right now, that's not the whole point of this thing. That's not the whole point. It's not here to render. It's here to I'm here to just enjoy the painting, you know? I love to cook. It's one of my personal hobbies that I just love to do, and I guess at times I love just cooking for the sake of cooking. You know, whether I'm going to eat it or someone else is going to eat it, I just really like to cook. And I think that's what's kind of like this, is I just want to enjoy the process of painting, you know? It's not for anyone else, it's just for the love. All right, now one thing to point out is all that background foliage behind the main tree. That was a lot easier because it's meant to be loose, right? It wasn't supposed to be the focal point. And I'm dancing around, not doing the foliage in the foreground. I'm dancing around it. Okay, why? Because I don't know how to do it yet. I'm a little nervous approaching it. So I'm just gonna touch up the other places. You know, I'm basically buying myself some time. Buying myself some time is an important thing to do because there's a whole lot of other areas that need work, right? So while that's happening, I found a brush. This brush that I'm experimenting with has this vertical leaf brush. You see I'm saving it right there because I'm like, whoa, this was a brush that I didn't initially intend for me to use in this manner, but it somehow creates the look of the leaves with the weight of the leaves and the way they're hanging. It just kind of looks right. So I started to experiment with this brush, and after a few brushstroke practices, I thought, okay, this might be working. So I saved it out, And anytime I do a eucalyptus tree or something of that manner with that type of foliage hang weight of the leaves, I know what kind of brush that I could use to at least initially get the impression. The leaves on this type of tree, they hang with such weight. I think that's important about being a concept designer and also learning about illustration and, becoming more observant of details, is that all trees are different, and we have to learn how to approach them as such ways, And so I think right now, as I'm kind of trying to paint and find out how to get color into this foliage, it's so challenging right now. It's not an easy task to do, but I think once you kind of figure out, in a little controlled area, oh, this is starting to work, then we can repeat that in other spaces. Okay? And so one strategy that I was trying to use over here is trying to make it pretty loose, make sure that we get a little bit of the good impression, but then on top of that, do some more kind of really solidified brush strokes that look like those types of leaves, So I'm going to start playing around with reflected light, some of the cools that you might see on the green leaves, the cool tone, maybe a little bit of direct sunlight with the saturated more, you can see the chlorophyll in the plants a little bit. And I think seeing those brush strokes right now, it's starting to become more visible. Like you're seeing the leaves kind of bending over and, like kind of curled over and stuff like that. So I think that's really cool. I think that's what's super important is like, it's this process right here. I was really excited to kind of explain this, is that I didn't know what direction or how to do those foliage, but I'm glad that we found out a way. We're innovating. We found a brush, and use that as a base template to kind of experiment and put down more. See, it's like measuring points, right? Like I was talking about earlier. It's like we want to experiment in that way. So I think that was a success, at least, with this painting here. Now bench. There's a bench over here. And going now into a little bit more right angles and straight lines, okay? And I think what's fun is that this painting has so many loose kind of brush strokes everywhere that once you put a tight line somewhere, it looks really, really tight, And I think that's part of the idea of contrast. Not everything has to be super crisp. And in fact, you can only get so crisp, with your edges. So knowing how to start, at least for myself, like in this loose manner to give myself some range, oh man, that's like one of the most key things I cannot forget for myself. So we're starting to get close, this painting is going to wrap up very, very shortly, and we're getting to some of the other details. Now, one thing that I want to point out is because this was a study and I'm just so focused on, the brush strokes, the gestures of the trees, the layering of the grass, is that some of the perspective looks off. Like the trees in the background are really sitting high on the ground plane, like really, really high. It feels optically wrong. So, and that's one of the things about being an artist, is that there's so many balls to juggle all the time. Light, color, composition, form, form and shape are different things, like texture, perspective, the list goes on. So one of them is bound to kind of be weaker than the other, right? So I think, at the due time, when it is time, we can go ahead and make those proper adjustments to the background trees, maybe drop them down just a little bit so it seems more compressed, sitting on the same ground plane. A little bit more layering, crop it down. All right, here we go. Let's move these trees down. All right, now moving them down makes the horizon line seem like it's more compressed. It's kind of more in, like they're all sitting on the same ground plane, just a little bit better. And I feel that this is well worth the adjustment. Now I do have to note that I took a little bit of a break between doing the adjustment, you know, and sometimes what I like to do, actually not sometimes, I do this all the time, is whenever there's a painting that I feel like is completed, I'll leave it on my screen and I'll just keep it there like for the rest of the day, and I'll just walk by it, I'll just look at it, and eventually a few hours later I'll notice something that's fundamentally wrong because it takes time to get past that point. So here we are, we're wrapping up this painting. It's a tree study. It's a little bit more thorough than some of my other ones, but I had a great time enjoying this process of just experimentation, this whole process of figuring things out, and also just slowing things down. I really fell in love with just painting again, and you know, back to the basics, right? So thanks again for joining me on this episode of The Process, where we examined a little bit of a personal painting process from nature. If you guys like this video and like this content, please give me a comment. Please like and subscribe. Let me know what you guys think. And be ready for more. We've got more content coming up pretty soon. So thanks for your support, everybody. All right. We'll see you guys on the next episode. Take care.